אוקיי, אנחנו התחלנו.
Okay, so shalom everybody again. It's good to be with all of you together again. What I see now mainly is I see mainly boxes with names. So I'll speak with the boxes and the names, the black boxes and the names. I thank the people who are not, but again, anyone should do what he or she is comfortable with. I want to dedicate this class. To my Rebbe, Rav Amital. Rav Amital was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Har Etzion in Gush Etzion, which I had the privilege to be there for 9 years. I had this chus to know Rav Amital as a Talmud. And he passed away 10 years ago. The Yortzeit was last Sunday. So we're mamish in the week of the Yortzeit of the 10 years. So I thought I would like to share with you in the next hour and 15 minutes, or now it's a little less. I would like to share with you, I want to give you, the title of the class is Basic Ideas in Rav Amital's Thought. Okay, and I think he was really a giant, and it's worth knowing some of his not trivial, I would say, ideas. He was a very powerful personality, influenced me a lot. I can't even measure. The more the times go, and I'm a community rabbi already for more than 11 years, and his influence on me and on other circles is one cannot even assess it. And I would explain soon why. We say these words about a lot of people, but here there is even an internal reason for it, for why his influence is sometimes not noticed, and only when you reflect, you understand, oh, actually, when I acted as a community rabbi in this way or that way, I was even unconsciously, I was even not aware of how much his impact was on me. So I will say a few words about Rav Amital's biography, mamash, very, very briefly, because I think it's very important to know these few comments that I'll make now. I think it's very important in order to understand his thought, his educational messages and Jewish educational Torah messages that I'm going to share with you in the coming moments. So Rav Amital was born in Grossberlin, that's somewhere I think in the border of Romania and Hungary. He was a Hungarian Jew. Was born there, not to a rabbinic family. He went to Yeshiva Ktana. His formal education was always, his daughters told me with a smile that always when he went to some ministries in Israel, and they would ask him, how many years of learning do you have? So we would say something like 4, because I think when in 4th grade, he tachlis, I think he finished his formal education. At any rate, he was in a yeshiva as a teenager, a yeshiva ktana, with a very special Rebbe that influenced him a lot. This Rebbe learned the Lithuanian methodology of learning Torah, learning Gemara, which is very different than the Hungarian method of learning Talmud. The Hungarian method of learning Talmud, tradition, I would say, of learning Talmud is to learn Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos, and then to learn the Maharsha, which is a commentator, one of the Achronim that explains all kinds of pshat problems, simple understand problems with the Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos. And that was done, and a lot oriented towards psak, towards halacha l'maisa. That's the Hungarian tradition of learning. And the Lithuanian, influenced by Reb Chaim Brisk, is the analytic movement of really analyzing the conceptual, making conceptual analysis of laws that appear in the Talmud. And this rabbi, Rabbi Chaim Halevi, who was his Rosh Yeshiva, it was a small yeshiva, he imported the Lithuanian learning, and they had a vision. The young student, the young Talmud, Yehuda Amital, then Yehuda Klein, and his Rebbe, they had the vision and the dream of combining the Lithuanian way of learning with the Hungarian and actually selling, I would say, importing the Lithuanian methodology also to Hungary. These were their dreams. Actually, Rav Amital, I can say, because I learned a lot of Gemara from him, he implemented it in our yeshiva here in Israel. But Tachlis, the dreams went away. The dreams to make a revolution in the Hungarian way of learning was burnt in the ashes of the Holocaust, meaning while he was a teenager in that yeshiva, then the Holocaust broke out, and Rav Amital was in the camps. It was in the camps all the years of the Holocaust as a teenager. He lost all his family, he lost all his family, his beloved grandma, his parents, everything. He lost everything. He lost his Rebbe. He asked his Rebbe, he told us, Rav Amital, he asked his Rebbe, what will be with our dreams? And his Rebbe answered him a very powerful answer. He said, we had our dreams, but if Hashem's will now is that we'll do another mission, then, then this is our mission now, with all the respect to our dreams. I think this story influenced Rav Amital, and he shared it with us because I could say about my Rebbe Rav Amital that the only thing that he was the employee only of one entity. He was the employee of God. He wasn't afraid of anyone, Rav Amital. He was working for God, that's all. Very independent. At any rate, so he survived the Holocaust, and here's another important story that explains his thought. While he was in yeshiva in Hungary as a teenager, this small yeshiva, he found a little booklet about the thought of Rav Kook. He describes that he read it all night, and he was, and here I'll say the Hebrew term, nidlakti. I was turned on. That's it. This little booklet was in his pocket all of his years in the camps. And he said that helped him survive the camps. And Rav Amital, when he was saying Harav, I had two Rashi Yeshivot, both are giants. I had Rav Amital and Rav Lichtenstein. When Rav Lichtenstein was saying Horav, he was referring to his father-in-law, Rav Soloveitchik. When Rav Amital was saying Harav Zatzal, he was speaking about Rav Kook. He saw himself as someone who really takes from Rav Kook, and we'll continue with that, but in a very different way than many of the other students of Rav Kook, and we'll explain that soon. So he survived the Holocaust, then he made Aliyah by his own as a refugee, a young refugee. Went to the Hebron yeshiva and studied there. In Hebron, he was known, the stories went about him, one story said that he knew 10,000 responsa literature by heart. Now, I don't know if it's true or not, but, no one tells such stories about me. What is definitely known by his roommates that he was going to sleep, you're going to sleep with a book. So he was going to sleep with responsa, with responsa books. He was finishing volumes after volumes, and we saw that in yeshiva, that as opposed to many Rashi Yeshivas and Rebbeim, he was very deep in Gemara. He was I would say he was bright, he was brilliant. But most of the people speak about Rav Lichtenstein's learning. And of course, I'm a Talmud of Rav Lichtenstein. Rav Lichtenstein had a methodology, and he really taught us how to learn. And Rav Lichtenstein was a giant in Torah and in Talmud, there's no doubt. But, Rav Amital, in a simple way, his classes combined the learning but he was always using also responsa literature. That shows something very, very deep about his personality. As it was said, he was a very, very unique combination of vision and practicality. We'll see that later, but here you see, even in his way of learning, in his Talmudic way of learning, that his shiurim were combined with classes, but always connected also to responsa literature. Yeah, the responsa literatures that, by the way, usually Rashi Yeshivos don't use, and I even hate to say sometimes are not that aware of, okay? Or not such, that don't have great bekius in it, which he had. So he was learning in Hebron, but every Shabbat he went for Shalosh Sudas to hear the talk of Rav Harlap. Rav Harlap was a student of Rav Kook. Not everyone in Hebron liked that. There was some criticism over the young boy, young Bachor who is makpid every Shabbos to go and hear hear a sicha, a talk from a student of Rav Kook with the thoughts of Rav Kook. Rav Amital, as I told you, was very independent. It was very clear to him that that's the right thing to do. Then he drafted to the Haganah, and the 48 war broke out, and he was a soldier. It was very, very clear to him. Just like he was later on in his life, in his biography, the founder of a Rosh Yeshiva, of a big Hester Yeshiva that combines army service with the Torah learning. That was his philosophy in person. He came to Israel as a refugee from the Holocaust alone, learned in Hebron. Once the 48 war broke out, he was a soldier. That's it. After the army, after the war, he wrote a programmatic essay as a young Bachor that Rashi Yeshivot praised. The article is called, and I studied it, Ledarko shel chayal b'milchemet ha'chayal hadati b'milchemet ha'komimiyut. The way of a religious soldier in the Independence War. And in this article, he lays down one of the most cornerstones of religious Zionist philosophy. He is making a very clear distinction in this article between two terms, religion and Torah. In a nutshell, he claims that religion is an exile term, and maybe even a goyish term. Religion is a very, very narrow term. It is focused on ritual, religious service, etc., etc. He said our Torah is Torat Chaim. It is not narrowed down to shaking a lulav and putting on tefillin, although these things are extremely important. Our Torah is a Torat Chaim, a Torah life that is actually expanded to all areas of life, including army, including state. This is what he outlined in that article. After he finished the army, he went to learn in a yeshiva of Rav Meltzer, and then he married the granddaughter of one of the Gedolim, Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer. After that, he moved to Rehovot, where his father-in-law, Rav Tzviuda Meltzer, had led a yeshiva, and he was a rebbe in Yeshivat HaDarom in Rehovot. In the 60s, the family moved to Jerusalem, and he just taught here in some seminars. He never planned to be a Rosh Yeshiva. He loved learning, but he saw himself as a simple Jew, like his grandparents, maximum, a rebbe, whatever. After the 6-day war, a group of young men who heard of Rav Amital and his and how inspiring he is and what an interesting and powerful personality he is, they came to him and asked him to found and be the Rosh Yeshiva in Kfar Etzion, Gush Etzion, after the 6-day war. Rav Amital asked him, "Why are you coming to me?" He was in an apartment in Givat Mordechai in Jerusalem, and Rabbi Hanan Porat, Zichrona Levracha, told him, "Look, one cannot stand on the side after Hashem made these miracles to us. And Rav Amital was convinced. And the rest is history. They went to a mountain empty of anything, just in the middle of nowhere in Gush Etzion. And Rav Amital said, on this mountain, hundreds of people will learn Torah in a yeshiva. One who would have come to see that moment would have said that Rav Amital is just, a crazy man, and there is nowhere here. And you're saying in this place there will be hundreds of young men learning Torah. But that's exactly what happened. He was, as I said, a very, very powerful combination between vision and practicality and down to earth. I skipped one important point, and then I'll then we're done with the biography, and I'll go to the basic ideas in his thoughts. When he was in Yeshivat HaDarom in Rehovot, he told his father-in-law that, I'll say it in Hebrew and translate, Tzarich lehagia lehesder im hatzava, that we need to get to an agreement, hesder, we need to get to an agreement with the army regarding army service of yeshiva bachors. That's how the term hesder was coined, because of that sentence that he said to his father-in-law, and they founded the seminar for teachers in Yeshivat HaDarom, which was the first Hesder Yeshiva, this and KBY together, meaning from two directions, the Hesder started, from Rav Amital in the seminar in Rehovot and from KBY. That was the beginning of the Hesder program. Rav Amital believed that, as I said, that the Torah is a Torat Chaim, and part of, and as he wrote in many times, that all the wars that the state of Israel are doing against its enemies, basing himself on the Rambam, Rav Amital claimed that all the wars that, and the Rambam in Hilchos Melachim, that all the wars that are done against Am Yisrael are really wars on Yichud Hashem, on the unity of Hashem. Meaning there could be all kinds of reasons for the war. You are occupying territories, you don't have territories, you're doing that, you're doing this. I just making the point that there were wars before we occupied the territories, there were wars. After we occupied the territories, there were wars. Before we withdrew from Gaza, there were wars. After we withdrew from Gaza, each time there is another reason, sometimes even some rational reasons, but he says, Tachlis, deeply under it, Am Yisrael represents Hashem's presence in the world, and actually all the wars are really on Yichud Hashem, on the unity of Hashem, and therefore the value of a religious soldier who acknowledges that is a very, very important value, and therefore it's inconceivable that yeshiva bachors will not participate in the wars of Israel. That was his philosophy. That's how he educated us. And by the way, his son also went to Hesder Yeshiva, meaning Rav Amital was not a hypocrite, or whatever he believed in. That's whatever he preached for his students, that's how he raised up his kids. This is true about both of my Rashi Yeshivas. And Hesder, as opposed to KBY, Hesder was lechatchila. Hesder was not b'diavad. That's the ideal way for a Torah person. That was very central to both of my Rashi Yeshivas. Okay, back to the time that he founded the yeshiva in Gush Etzion. Rav Amital's way of teaching us, and in general, was by telling us stories. Rav Meir Lichtenstein, the son of Rav Lichtenstein, said in a day of learning in memory of his father, he was speaking about a long article that his father wrote about Hesder Yeshivot, was published in Tradition. The philosophy of Hesder, or the ideology of Hesder. You could all find it, a beautiful article, very fundamental of Rav Lichtenstein. Said Rabbi Meir, after explaining the main ideas in this article, he said, as usual, Rav Amital was able to deliver the same message that my father delivered in a long article. Rav Amital was able to deliver it in a short story. That was his way. And when Rav Amital founded the yeshiva, he said, he told the story to all the people who were there, and he said, that's the idea of the yeshiva that we're now starting. And here goes the story. The story is about the Baal HaTanya. The Baal HaTanya, the Admor, the first Admor of Chabad. He once had to go from his place and learn in a certain house. In that house, there was also his grandson, the great Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Admor HaTzemach Tzedek. Now, the way it was that the Baal HaTanya was in the most, it was room in front of a room. You understand? There was an entrance, and then there were 3 rooms. In the most external room, there was a baby in a crib. In the middle room, there was the grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, learning Torah. And in the most interior room, the 3rd room that was most inside, was the Baal HaTanya learning Torah. So the story goes, they were learning Torah, and all of a sudden the Baal HaTanya hears a baby crying. Since his grandson was closer to the baby, as I explained, the Baal HaTanya assumed that his grandson will take care of this. But the crying continued and continued. Once the Baal HaTanya saw that the baby is still crying and nothing is moving here, he passed by the room where his grandson was learning, went to the external room. He saw that the baby fell from the crib or was somewhat uncomfortable. He fixed the things, calmed down the baby. The baby was calmed down, and then he went back. On his way back, he stopped by his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, and asked him, excuse me, didn't you notice that a baby was crying here for several minutes? The Tzemach Tzedek was shocked, and he said, oh, I'm sorry, I really didn't notice it. I was so much into the learning. The Baal HaTanya told him, I'll say it in Hebrew and then I'll say it in English. לימוד תורה שלא שומעים ממנו את בכיו של התינוק, יש בו פגם. A Torah learning that is not attentive, that you can't hear from it, the cry of a Jewish boy, is a problematic learning. That's what the Baal HaTanya said, and went back to his room to learn. This is Rav Amital defined this story as what he wants as the DNA of our yeshiva. Let's explain. In order to clarify, Rav Amital was totally for the concept that a young man of 18 years old should dedicate several years of his life to Torah learning. And when he dedicates his life for Torah learning between the ages 18 and 23, it's not that every other day he goes to a hospital to make chesed, or goes to this way, or goes to that. No, he's now focusing, he has a mission. Now he's building his spiritual ground to be a balabat, to be a good balabat. And now is the time to dedicate for Torah learning. And yet still, the Beit Midrash should be attentive to the cry of the Jewish boy, should be involved. And Rav Amital explained, that means that to be open to the Israeli society, to hear the cries of the Israeli society. Sometimes the baby, said Rav Amital, i.e. the Israeli society, is crying and is not even knowing that it's not even aware that it's crying. The Torah learning in the yeshiva should be such a yeshiva that is involved in this thing. Now, the message of the story is There are several messages in this story. The straightforward message that Rav Amital stressed is, as I said, to be attentive to the cry, to be involved, the involvement, not to be closed in a capsula in a yeshiva, but to be involved in what's happening in Israeli society. That is one. But the other message, which is very, very central to Rav Amital's thought and personality, is the enoshiyut, to be a human being. The Torah was given to human beings, not to angels. Rav Amital loved, and therefore hearing the cry of the Jewish baby, that is not, I can assure you that there are other schools, unfortunately, Rav Amital disagreed with them. There are other schools, Orthodox schools in Judaism, that would say this story of the Baal Tanya and the Tzemach Tzedek. They would say it as a hesped to the Tzemach Tzedek. Look how serious he was in his learning, that he couldn't even hear a baby crying because he was so much into the learning. What a darga. Once there was a hesped on a gadol that when he was so much into his learning, he sometimes forgot the names of his kids. So much he was into the learning. My other Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Lichtenstein, commented on that, and he said, I'm not sure that it's a praise. Okay? So I'm returning back. The fact that while you're learning, the fact that a cry, a simple human gesture, the Baal Tanya was a mensch. You hear a baby crying, you calm him down, even though you're learning. The Torah was given for angels with weaknesses, and they should acknowledge their weaknesses, said Rav Amital. He wrote a book. The book is called Ve'ha'aretz Natan Livnei Adam. You see the title. And the land was given for human beings, which means the Torah is lo b'shamayim. The Torah was given to human beings, not to angels. He loved quoting the Kotzker Rebbe's saying, Anshei Kodesh Tiyun Li, Anshei Kodesh Tiyun Li, that you should be to me, said God in Deuteronomy, holy human beings, sanctified human beings. Says the Kotzker Rebbe, angels? God says, angels? I have enough in heaven. I want human beings that are worshiping me. And that's why Rav Amital, as a chazan in Yamim Noraim, and he was a tremendous Baal Tefillah. In Rehovot, they were speaking decades after he left Rehovot about his Tefillah, and I could testify, I heard him for 9 years. He's still with me. All of his simplicity, his authenticity, the fact that he was very authentic, a simple Jew, just a healthy, relaxed, simple Jew, not a Rosh Yeshiva, an Admor who didn't want Hasidim. All of this was expressed in his davening. And the two piyutim that he added in the davening are piyutim that are explaining the concept that even though Hashem has angels in heaven, he desired his praise from simple human beings. So you see, as I said from this story, both of these messages, the enoshiyut, the fact that he was a human person. And by the way, this book, Ve'ha'aretz Natan Livnei Adam, was translated to English. It's available for purchase. It's called Jewish Values in a Changing World, I believe. Yeah, Jewish Values in a Changing World. That's how it's called. And actually, most chapters of it could be found on the web in the VBM if you do Jewish Values in the Changing World. So you could see some examples from there, or even more than examples. At any rate, as I said, he was a simple, healthy, Jew. That happened to be a Rosh Yeshiva. Actually, when Rav Amital founded the yeshiva, he was planning just to found it and to leave the yeshiva after he finds a giant to be a Rosh Yeshiva. He told all the young men young adults that were in yeshiva that he will leave the yeshiva. He wrote a letter to Rav Lichtenstein to America, inviting him to head the yeshiva. He signed in the yeshiva Yehuda. Rav Lichtenstein he signed the letter Yehuda. Rav Lichtenstein had no clue that it's a Rosh Yeshiva writing to him. He just thought it's one of the activists who was writing him. And he ended up, what happened is the only reason why Rav Amital remained the Rosh Yeshiva and didn't just leave the ground to Rav Lichtenstein to head the yeshiva, is that Rav Lichtenstein stipulated and insisted after he met him that he's willing to take the yeshiva only if he will be a Rosh Yeshiva together with him. You see again from here how tsanua, how humble he was, and and what a simple man he was, just a very simple man. I remember sitting at a Shabbat table when I was in Torah Mitzion and Shlichut. We went to a Bikur Moledet, meaning we came to 1 month, and after 2 years, between the second and the third year, we spent 1 month in the summer in Israel, our family. And since we're close friends with his daughter, we spent one Shabbat there. And it just happened to be that I had the zchus to be in Shabbat meals with him. He was sitting quietly on the table as a grandpa, enjoying his grandsons. Didn't feel any obligation to speak or to, he was just there. And I was not surprised, but it was impressive to see how simple he is, even though he was a giant. I said something about honesty, authenticity, and the fact that he didn't like any fabrications, anything that is not real. Here, there is a very educational message that he taught us. I want to ask the crowd here, what is the highest level of tzedakah? Yeah, the Rambam outlines 8 levels of tzedakah. What is the highest level of tzedakah? Actually, I even taught this here to this crowd like a year ago. What is the highest level of tzedakah? However, each one of you can unmute himself, so don't worry about it. Just speak up. What's the highest level of tzedakah? There are different levels of tzedakah. I see there is silence. I don't know how to interpret that silence. Mostly from black boxes. So are they with me, or it's only the white names on the black boxes? The highest level of tzedakah. Okay? What's the highest level of giving tzedakah? The most perfect way of giving a tzedakah. Okay, so Harold answers in the chat. That's help to find a job. That's correct. Giving a loan, or helping finding a job, or doing a partnership with the poor, that is the highest level, says the Rambam. That's true. What is the second highest level? Let's say, since this is not mamish literally tzedakah, right? You're finding a job, you're making a partnership, you're giving a loan. Let's say if I really gave tzedakah, what is the highest level to do it? That's the second out of 8 levels. What is the most perfect way of actually giving money to someone? Without him knowing, that's good. Without him knowing and giving anonymously. We call it in science double blind. The giver doesn't know to whom he gave, and the receiver doesn't know who did he get it from. That is, Maimonides says, that's the highest level in tzedakah. When you're actually giving tzedakah, the highest level is double blind. The giver doesn't know that he gave, the receiver doesn't know from whom he received. Comes Rav Amital and says, I heard it in my own eyes, in my own ears, with my own ears. I heard it. And it's also written in that book. But he repeated that message. The same holds for educational and spiritual influence. The highest level of the educational action is when the educator is currently not aware even that he is now in an action of influencing, of educating, and that the receiver, the one that is influenced, the student, the son, the daughter, the grandchild, the granddaughter, are not aware that they're actually now in a process of education. If the two sides, the influencer and the influencee, if I'm allowed to say that, are not aware that they're now in a process of being in an educational process, that's the most effective and the highest, the most ideal way of educating. Rav Amital explains also why, and it's from both sides. When someone knows that I'm about to influence him, to educate him, naturally there's some feelings of resistance, even a healthy one in general. The feeling of independence is a healthy feeling. It's a human, natural, and healthy feeling. And when I know he is going to influence me now, there could be natural impulses and natural feelings, motions of resistance. Therefore, when I'm not aware that I'm influenced, then I'm more naturally influenced. That's one, more effectively influenced. That's from the side of the receiver. But not less important, from the side of the educator, of the parent, of the grandparent. If you know, I am now educating, or I now want to educate, there's something not authentic. There is a potential that your behavior here will not be authentic. When you are just acting the way you are, being who you are, acting bepashtus, with authenticity, but as a role model, as a good example, as a personal example, then people are influenced by you because they don't sense something that is not authentic. Rav Amital once spoke with alumni. It's in a video, and it's very, very powerful, that sentence that they made, that he said, he spoke with parents and told them, sometimes parents are trying to be more than what they are. Call it show off, call it whatever. Sometimes out of being nervous that they need to influence their kids. He said, you know, your kids, even when they don't know how to speak that way, to verbalize it, but they sense when things are fabricated. They sense ziyuf, falsehood. When things are false, they sense it. Be who you are. Just be who you are. That's what he said. This is very important. And I told you in the beginning of our talk that Rav Amital's influence on myself and on many of his students is in many, many wide circles, and sometimes we're even not aware how much he influenced us. Only in reflection, I look back at some talks that I have with some congregants, and I say, actually Rav Amital was present there. You see that was his way to influence without you knowing that you're even influenced. Rav Amital encouraged us. There are two more ideas that are flowing from that Torah that he taught us about tzedakah and education. First of all, the concept of Kirish Hashem and Chilul Hashem. He's speaking here about one being personal example, a good personal example, right? And that's the most powerful way, actually, to educate. Just be who you are, okay? And that will influence the most. Rav Amital, as a Holocaust survivor, was extremely sensitive to the things of Kirish Hashem and Chilul Hashem. When he felt there is a Chilul Hashem going on by rabbis, by others, he was speaking up. He was willing to pay a very high price for that. But he did it. He did it because he couldn't stand silent when he felt that there is Chilul Hashem. That was a very, very sensitive point to him, Chilul Hashem. And of course, the value of Kiddush Hashem. What is Kiddush Hashem? He said many times. Here he quoted the Gemara in Yoma that was paskin in the Rambam. The Rambam, based on the Gemara in Yoma, defines Kiddush Hashem as a person who is associated with Torah, that is acting nicely, that is praised by all the people. And because he's praised amongst all the people, then people are saying, this is a Torah man. Ashrei mi shelimdato Torah. Blessed is the one who taught him Torah. The sages are learning this from the verse, Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, obviously, that we said this morning, is not an easy pasuk. How can a person love Hashem? Do you see Hashem? How can you relate easily to Hashem and love him? Many answers were given to that question. But one of the answers that our sages gave, only one, is that they're actually darshaning the pasuk a little differently. They're making the vowels a little differently. Ve'ihavta et Hashem Elokecha. Ve'ihavta, meaning you should make Hashem's name loved by the people. Not ve'ahavta, but ve'ihavta. You should make Hashem being loved by the crowd. How do you do that? When you're acting with a personal example. When you're on the one hand, a person that is, not speaking Lashon Hara, smiling to people, but not also detached from people. Holy and involved. That is what the Rambam describes there. So Rav Amital was a big believer in this. So this is another message that we see from the Tzedakah / education story. And yet another one is Rav Amital's education to us. He stressed it for independence. Rav Amital wanted his students to be independent. He used to tell us, Ani lo rotze amitalim ktanim. I don't want little Amitals. And actually, in his Levaya, one of the people who did eulogize him, I think his son, Rav Yoel Amital Shlita, said, you told that you don't want Amitalim Ktanim, and it turned out that many of your students became Amitalim Gdolim, big Amitals. Rav Amital was an independent person, and not only that he was an independent person, he educated us to be independent. He didn't want it, he didn't make our life easy. He, when someone came to consult with him, he would explain considerations and tell him many times, now, Kadima, you make the decision. Rav Amital opposed, he said that a personal responsibility, claimed Rav Amital, is an extremely important thing, personal responsibility. He was very reserved from the concept of Das Torah. He spoke explicitly against it. He said that Das Torah, I'll just explain, Das Torah is a concept that the Chazon Ish introduced very much to the Israeli crowd. Das Torah is that the rabbis are telling you what to do in politics, are telling you what to do in all kinds of fields of life. Needless to say, in all kinds of circles are telling you whether to go to that business deal or not, whether to do this or not. Rav Amital was extremely reserved from all of this. Rav Amital said, it was not embarrassed to say, and that's how he educated us, that they're experts in many fields. And he's not claiming to be, some rabbis have the disease of thinking that they understand in everything. Rav Amital was very far from that. Doctors understand better than me in medication. If I need to consult regarding corona and what is pikuach nefesh, I'll ask the experts. Issues of security and land, there are experts that I'll hear their opinions. And so it is with all fields of life. I'm not claiming to know everything. I'm a simple man. I'm a Rosh Yeshiva, that's true, but that doesn't mean that I understand in every field of life everything. I have respect to other people who are experts in other fields. He was against Das Torah, but here I want to warn from a little misunderstanding regarding his thought. That doesn't mean to say that he felt that rabbis should not speak up on issues of economy, security, Eretz Yisrael, Israeli society, etc. Not at all. As I told you, Rav Amital is the man who made the clear distinction between religion and Torah. And Torah means that the Torah is Torat Chaim. The Torah has a spiritual message and practical messages sometimes regarding all fields of life, no doubt. Rav Amital was the first one to say that. And therefore, it's not just that the rabbi's role is merely confined and narrowed to giving a talk in the shul and a pastoral job and leading the services in the shul and giving Torah classes. Of course, that's a very important role of them. But Rav Amital was the first one to say that a rabbi should be involved and that the Torah has messages on all areas of life. But yet still, these things don't have a status of a psak. That's what's important. Issues that are depending on all kinds of assessments that are relating to experts, etc. The rabbis could lay out some of the principles, but they're not becoming all of a sudden the people that understand whether a surgery should take place or not. With all due respect, the doctor understands in some of these matters much more than the rabbi. So Rav Amital was very much to educating us, as I said, both to independence and as I said, to personal example and to be just who we are, not to be nervous, to be something that we're not, but rather just to be who we are, acknowledge our weaknesses and try to overcome them. The fact that a human being is limited and that this should be acknowledged, Rav Amital implemented it to himself in many manners. I remember once asking him a question myself. I challenged him with a question. And he said, you're saying that, he said, I asked him about how he acted regarding some matter that it seemed not coherent with some other things he said. So Rav Amital told me, Yeshli kushiot al atzmi. I have kashas also on myself. He wasn't trying to say, to wash me away with some answer. He acknowledged the fact that indeed it's a little problematic. First and foremost, he implemented it regarding his attitude to the Holocaust, which was very unique. And even a book was written about Rav Amital's attitude towards the Holocaust. As I said, Rav Amital was a Holocaust survivor. Already as a young man, a young yeshiva bachur, when what turned later to be his father-in-law, then not yet, asked him about the Holocaust and offered him some explanations, questions, theological explanations to Holocaust. Rav Amital was very stubborn in rejecting all of them. Rav Amital insisted till his last day, from the minute he passed the Holocaust, that the Holocaust is something that is not explained and cannot be explained to us human beings. I want to explain why this is unique. There are Haredi approaches, some of the Haredi approaches to the Holocaust, the theological approaches. And now we're in Chodesh Av, so it's appropriate to speak about this. There are some Haredi approaches that are putting the Holocaust in the general paradigm of reward and punishment, meaning the Holocaust was a punishment for the Enlightenment. The Holocaust was a punishment for assimilation. The Holocaust was a punishment for Zionism. All of these explanations Rav Amital strongly rejected. Rav Amital said there is nothing on earth that can justify the slaughter of 1 million children and of so many Gedolim. This is something that cannot be explained as a punishment. I can't imagine a sin that is so catastrophic as that deserves a punishment like the Holocaust. Similarly, Rav Amital dismissed with strong words the explanation Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook gave to the Holocaust. Here, as I tell you, that's a machlokus within religious Zionism. Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook claimed that the Holocaust was a very powerful and painful, inevitable surgery, operation that Hashem did to uproot us from the exile. Hashem acknowledged that we're not coming, and he didn't phrase it as a punishment, okay, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, but he said it was an action of a godly, powerful surgery to uproot the people of Israel so that they will be, to uproot Am Yisrael from the Galut to Eretz Yisrael. Rav Amital again strongly dismissed that explanation. Nothing can justify the horrors of the Holocaust, including the great present of the state of Israel. Rav Amital was a Zionist. Rav Amital was saying Hallel and Yom Ha'atzmaut. Rav Amital was a soldier. Rav Amital founded Gush Etzion. Okay, no one could question Rav Amital's Zionism. Okay, he was heading a Esther Yeshiva. But he said, even the great godly present of the state of Israel that we're thanking Hashem with full heart. And actually, I quoted in my not the previous class, like a month and a half ago, I quoted you a paragraph from Rav Amital saying that we should thank Hashem in Yom Ha'atzmaut for having again our religious king, our Jewish sovereignty reestablished. Rav Amital was not questioning all of that. But that cannot justify the Holocaust. Even such a great present. Nothing can justify the terrible horrors of the Holocaust. Also, Rav Amital didn't identify with the explanation of Hester Panim, of, some people say that Hashem just withdrew in the Holocaust. Hester Panim, he covered his face. Yeah, that's a term in Deuteronomy, that sometimes Hashem is covering his face and is kind of withdrawing from the world and letting the world run by the human beings with their evil freedom of choices like Hitler. Rav Amital didn't accept that too. I believe that he thought that this is such a terrible thing that here God should have intervened. But this I'm just saying from my own head. What I heard from him in my own ears, that what he felt, and he explained it, he shared with us his personal experience as a teen in the camps in the Holocaust. Being in a life threat. Many times, there's one time that he even said that he was hiding in a closet and they opened many closets there and for somehow he was saved, miraculously. He said, during the Holocaust, I saw the hand of God. I can't say that it was a coverage of his face. This was too big. My wife coined it a negative miracle, if you understand what I mean. Meaning, this is too big from being stam a natural thing. In Rav Amital's, I saw Hashem, but I didn't understand, and I don't understand what is his message, what he was trying to say. Okay? Therefore, Rav Amital say, okay, we need to acknowledge no explanation. We have zero explanation to the Holocaust. A human being's mind cannot provide an explanation to the Holocaust. We are left as simple Jews with a question. We're left with a question. We should be humble and know we're simple people. Sometimes we're left with questions. Okay. I want to add another idea of Rav Amital that has to do with what I said, that simplicity and authenticity, and not showing off. There is a sicha, a talk that Rav Amital used to repeat and say again and again in Parshat Kitisa, or in Parshat Shkalim. As you know, every Jew is commanded to give a machzis a shekel, right? To give a half of a shekel. And as you know, just like Bibi's presents, there's no difference between a rich and a poor. Everyone gets the same amount, or in this case, everyone gives. In Kitisa, everyone gives the same amount. Everyone gives a machzis a shekel, half of a shekel. The wealthy, the poor, every single Jew gives the same thing. Rav Amital said, yes, but everyone gives his own input, his own spiritual input in that giving. Meaning, externally, all the Jews are doing the same action. While internally, it is expected that everyone will do it with his kavanah, with his way of identifying with the mitzvah. The same Rav Amital said, based on Nachmanides, regarding the presence of when the Mishkan was inaugurated, when the tabernacle was inaugurated, then all the presidents of the tribes gave their presents, right? Their donations. Now, the Torah repeats these donations again and again and again and again and again. Right? We read it in Hanukkah. That's our laning in Hanukkah. And the question goes, why does the Torah repeat the same donation for 12 times? Torah could have just stated briefly, each president gave the following. Okay? The Torah knows to do that. Here again, Rav Amital said, each president, they all gave the same donation, but each one had his own meaning in it. Comes Rav Amital and says the same is regarding mitzvos. Each one of us is putting tefillin in the morning. We're doing the same thing. Yet still, each one should put his own input there. What Rav Amital stresses here in this opinion is two things, and both of them are important. On the one hand, Rav Amital wants us to do the things with our heart, and to do it with personal identification. To bring your own personality to Avodas Hashem. Then it won't be technical. That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, Rav Amital was very reserved from the people that need to be unique. Meaning, I want to do the mitzvah differently. I want to do this. The mitzvahs are not enough for me. Rav Amital quoted the saying in the Gemara that one who makes a vow, it's as if he built his private altar and gave an offering outside of the Beit Mikdash in his private altar, which is forbidden to do. So Rav Amital didn't like that. Rav Amital and the Torah and the Gemara, sages are reserved from people accepting on themselves vows to do extra mitzvos. Chumrah is a good thing only when there's an internal coverage to it, said Rav Amital. Chumrah is a good thing only if it has an internal coverage to it. But you should find your own personality in Avodas Hashem while doing the same thing that all of Am Yisrael is doing. You don't need to deviate yourself. You don't need to look different. You should be very normal externally. You should be normal externally, and inside there should be the fire. Again, because we're not interested in show off. It's not that people need to know you are unique. You need to know that you're unique. You could do the same mitzvot that all of Am Yisrael are doing. You don't need to do different things. Within the framework of all Am Yisrael, there you could find your own unique actualization. Okay. Rav Amital's another message has to do with our own parsha. With our own parsha. Rav Amital said about Sefer Dvarim. In Sefer Dvarim, in Shira Sa'azinu, it says, Binu Shno Dor Vador. That Moshe, in the first verses of our parsha Dvarim, says that Moshe explained the Torah to the people who are coming to the land. He started his speeches. This is what we're going to read in 2 days from now. And it says, Binu Shno Dor Vador. You should understand the ways of every generation. Rav Amital said, quoting the Rebbe that founded the Hasidus of Gur, that the Torah has a message to every generation. The Torah is relevant to every generation. Binu Shno Dor Vador. Contemplate every generation and generation. The Torah has a message for every generation, and it's the job of us, the rabbis, the Torah people, to explain the Torah in the language, in the way, by being involved, by hearing the cry of the Jewish baby, to make the Torah relevant to each generation. That is why Rav Amital was very conservative in some manners. He was a tremendous combination of being conservative, but on the other hand, extremely open-minded and very open for renewal, and very open even to reconsidering his own views on some matters. It's not only on political views. I'll give you an example. When Rav Lichtenstein made Aliyah from America in the 70s, he had a chavrusa with his daughter in Gemara. That's what he learned from his father-in-law, Rav Soloveitchik. In Israel these days, even in religious Zionist circles, it was extremely odd that ladies are learning Gemara. I even remember it as a kid in the 70s. That was weird, extremely weird. Rav Amital wasn't for it. There was even an article that he wrote in the 70s saying that he doesn't see any points in girls learning Gemara. Doesn't see any point in this. Well, as some of you know, in the new millennium, at the first years of 2000, Rav Amital was a very, very big supporter of the Beit Midrash and Migdal Oz for ladies with the Gemara curriculum. He said openly that he changed his mind. He said it openly that he changed his mind. And he even brought the biggest donator to that Beit Midrash. So here again, he was not embarrassed to reconsider his views, to change his views with times. Binu Shno Dor Vador. Also, even regarding other issues like, let's say, the philosophy of Rav Shagar regarding postmodernism, was very reserved, but then in an evening that was done half a year before Rav Shagar passed away, he said, "We didn't understand you. We didn't understand you, Rav Shagar. Now we see that your ideas are very important." He was not embarrassed to say openly that he changed his mind. He was reconsidering himself. His mind was working. His heart was working all the time. I'll finish perhaps the shir with another important idea of Rav Amital that I think is worth much more time, but I'll just say it briefly. Or you know what? First, I'll add two more implementation of humanity. You know, we're going to blow the shofar soon, Bezrat Hashem. Where do we learn from that there are 100 tkiot, that we have 100 tkiot, our minhag to have 100 blowings of shofar? We're learning it from a very weird source. The mother of Sisera was crying 100 times. Now, why do we need to learn from this wicked, the mother of this wicked king, that she cried 100 times when he didn't return from the battle, that we have to blow 100 times? He said, a mother's crying for her son, even if it's an evil person, but a mother's crying for her son is the most authentic sin. We see that even from that wicked, perhaps, lady and wicked king, that was a moment of truth. This is a thing, this is the most authentic thing, and we can import it. I think that shows you also Akedah. Akedah, we'll speak about Akedah. Here I'll add more things about shofar and Rav Amital. Some people picture the Akedah as Avraham Avinu, the big believer, just obeying God's commandment. Rav Amital said yes. Rav Amital, Avraham Avinu, the big believer, adhered and obeyed in an act of obedience to the hard commandment of God, went ahead to sacrifice his son. But Rav Amital says, does it mean that Avraham Avinu didn't feel then, in these days, his natural feelings towards his son, his painful feelings? Here Rav Amital has a great innovation. All of us say in Slichos, Mi she'ana le'Avraham Avinu behar haMoriah hu yanenu. You know, at the end of Slichos, we have a whole bunch of Mi she'ana le'Avraham, Mi she'ana le'Yitzchak, Mi she'ana le'Yaakov. The one who answered Avraham Avinu in the Moriah mountain, he will answer us. Question comes, where in the Torah did you see that Avraham Avinu prayed to Hashem in the Akedah? Look there in Parshas Vayera. You won't find it even with a microscope. It doesn't say anywhere that Avraham Avinu prayed to Hashem. And yet the Slicha that we're saying is saying explicitly, the one who answered Avraham Avinu in Har Moriah will answer us. He proves from other sources that Avraham Avinu apparently, while going to sacrifice his son, was praying and begging Hashem that the Gzera will be removed, that this decree will be removed. Avraham was praying to Hashem that his son will be saved, that he won't have to do it. Again, it's not that the holy person is not hearing the cry of the little child. I go back to the story that I began with. The holy person has feelings, has human feelings, and that's his praise. Have natural father-son feelings and compassion and relationship. And this is the right Oved Hashem. What I wanted to mention in a minute is just that Rav Amital also believed, as part of the place that he gave to human beings and their powers and their weaknesses, Rav Amital said that natural morality has a big weight. It's not just that morals and ethics is only what God commands. No. Hashem, he quoted the Chizkuni saying that, why was Cain punished? Cain had a very good legal defense. Cain could have told Hashem, and also the people of the Mabul could have told Hashem, you never commanded us not to steal. Or Cain could have said, you never commanded me not to murder. It's true. There is no explicit commandment, but you were born in God's image, and therefore you know that. There is natural morality that is stemming from the fact that human beings were created in God's image. Therefore, he quoted the Hungarian rabbi who wrote that one is not allowed to eat, cannibalism. One is not allowed to eat human flesh, and it's not written explicitly in the Torah, but it doesn't have to be written in the Torah. It doesn't have to be written in the Torah. It is the biggest sin to be a cannibalist. If the Torah would have mentioned it, by the way, as one of the items that are not kosher, human flesh, that would be degrading, putting us as if we're one kind of animal. So there's a reason for that omission. And you, out of your natural morality, you should know better. So this is a very important concept of Rav Amital. And Rav Amital, as I said, was a simple man. He didn't want people to wish him that your son would be a gadol hador. He said, I want my son to be a good Jew. That's all. Rav Amital, as opposed to many Rashi Yeshiva, didn't see his task as creating Rashi Yeshivos. That too. But he wanted to create yeshiva bachors who are involved in all areas of life. That was his mission for the yeshiva, including Rashi Yeshivos and Rebbeim. But also, not stam religious people, but deep religious people, yeshiva bachors, that are involved in all areas of life. So I'll conclude the shir with that. He inspired us a lot with his authenticity, his striving for truth, his influence, his sensitivity to Kirish Hashem, his educating us to be independent and not to be someone who are not, but to have the burning fire, but to be it, as he loved to quote that midrash, that the burning fire is closed, meaning you don't have to show up yourself. You could find your uniqueness while doing what all of Am Yisrael is doing, natural morality, and influence by personal example and Kiddush Hashem. Okay. So have a meaningful fast, and Bezrat Hashem Yibane Beit HaMikdash.
אוקיי, אנחנו סיימנו, נכון?
כן.